It is good to see so many present this morning. It's good to see Mama Tess back and also Sister Sue. I know has not been here. And I wish I could remember Melanie's sister's last name, Sheila Richardson. She has moved to Linden, Tennessee. And so if you're wondering where she is, I was, and that's where she is now living. So keep her in your prayers as she lives there. But we're glad you're here. Hope you'll come back this evening, as we'll be meeting at 5, if the Lord wills. It's not uncommon when children are born in the world for their parents, not too long afterwards, to start giving them a nickname according to how they act. Even some people here. When I moved here, I learned that some people weren't called by their real names, they were called by their nicknames. And if you had lived during the Old West, and you think about the Old Western times, if a person was fast with a gun, they were called a gunslinger. If a person today spends all their time running, you call them a running man. A person who has never been sick and who doesn't get sick, I like to call them a Teflon man. And when you think about these different nicknames, Jesus actually was known as the Miracle Man. And my text this morning is found in John 3. It's in verses 1 and 2. It said there was a man of the Pharisees named Nicodemus, a ruler of the Jews, and we're told in verse 2, the same came to Jesus by night and said unto him, Rabbi, we know that thou art a teacher come from God. And then he says, for no man can do these miracles that thou doest except God be with him. So Nicodemus, he was right. Jesus was indeed a miracle man. He performed 37 recorded miracles that we have in the New Testament. And these were miracles that, as we shall see, proved his divinity, proved that he was indeed the Son of God. In fact, later on, John said in John 20, he told in verse 30, he said, how many other signs truly did Jesus in the presence of his disciples, which are not written in this book? I've always contemplated, I wonder what different ones he did. Can you just imagine? We're told in verse 31, but these are written, that ye might believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that believing ye might have life through his name. So there was no disputing that Jesus was the miracle man. And if you want to know about a person, all you have to do is look at what a person does. Because what a person does really helps you to understand more about the person. And the same is true of Jesus. If you look in the Bible at Jesus, and you look at his miracles and what he did, it helps us to understand better his character. Because his character is seen through his works. And so this morning, I want to notice about Jesus the miracle man. Now some people may wonder, what is a miracle? We don't have any miracles today like they had in Bible times. A miracle, a good definition I found, is something above the laws of nature which could not happen in the ordinary course and operations of nature. A miracle is beyond human concept. It defies the laws of nature. It's divine. And so when we look at it, we don't have time to read every single verse, so I just have some up here this morning. I want to notice just 3 things about Jesus' miracles. First of all, when you look at them, you see in his miracles divine pity, and you could say compassion. Of the 37 miracles recorded, in each one of them, with the exception of one, Jesus brought help to the needy. And we'll just notice a few. In Matthew the 15th chapter, he had compassion there on the multitude. And we're told he fed the multitude. If you look in the 20th chapter, verses 32 through 34, he gave sight to 2 blind men. He had compassion. He had pity upon them. Mark 1, 40 through 42, he saved an individual from a death sentence. He cured a man of his leprosy, which was a death sentence. And then in Luke 7, 13 through 14, you remember the widow that lived in Nain, her only son, he raised from the dead. So when you look at Jesus' miracles, just from the compassion of them, you not only see God's love, but you see God's love in action. And it's manifested through what Jesus is doing. So Nicodemus was right when he said what he said, that no man can do these miracles that thou doest except God be with you. There's something else. Not only were the miracles of Jesus riddled with divine pity and compassion, you see divine power. And if we just look at the ones in John, you look at the first one in John, the 2nd chapter. John said this is the first miracle that Jesus did. Here in verses 1 through 11, he's turning water into wine. Now, this shows his power over quality. Now, I'm not going to, some may say, well, that means it's okay to drink because Jesus made wine. Well, if you study the Bible wines, the word ones and onus, most agree that it was probably just the grape juice that Jesus made, because he condemned, and the Bible condemns drunkenness and drinking. So why would Jesus turn around and make something that's going to make people drunk? It just doesn't make any sense. And if you look at the context of it in the Greek words, you can see. But you see here what normally would have taken months for something to have been made, Jesus just did it. And then another example. His miracles show his divine power, his power over distance. In John 4, starting around verse 46, going to 54, a man had lost his son. We're told he was a nobleman. And what happened is, he came to Jesus. But what's so interesting about this, if you look at where the man lived, it was over 20 miles away. And just by the mere word, the man's son was healed. So Jesus, unlike people today who they'll claim have to be right there with them, Jesus, it didn't matter how far away a person was. He had power not only over quality, but over distance. Something else about his miracles. He had power over disease and time. You know, the longer a person has had an affliction, the harder it is to get over. Doctors will tell you that. And then once you're bedridden, they'll even tell you your body's deconditioned, and it takes longer. In this account of John, the 5th chapter, 1 through 9, we're told about a man who had had an infirmity 38 years. Some of you aren't even 38 years old. I remember when I was 38. It was a good year. It really was. But just imagine, 38 years, and yet Jesus healed him. And then you see something else. You see power over quantity. We have an account here, again, of Jesus feeding the 5,000 with 5 loaves and 2 fishes with plenty left over. That was one reason that they thought, man, this is the perfect king. Not only can he perform miracles, they misunderstood his kingdom. They thought it was going to be earthly. You get wounded, he can heal you. And not only if we get hungry, what else can he do? He can feed you. They didn't understand the kingdom, that it was spiritual. But here you see he had power over quantity. And he had something else, power over nature. In John 6, we have the account of him walking upon the sea. Matthew 14 talks about it. Remember, Peter jumped out of the boat, and Jesus was able to walk on the water. And then it says when he got in the boat, in Matthew's account, the wind ceased. He had power over the elements. That's hard for us to imagine. And yet Jesus had it. And then, probably the one that astonishes most people, John 11. He had a friend named Lazarus. And we're all familiar with the story. And he was told Lazarus was dead. He waited 4 days. But he went and he raised Lazarus from the dead. So he even had power over death. But when you look at the power of Jesus, you can't read the miracles that Jesus performed without being impressed about the mere power of His Word. I mean, that was something to behold. And if you think about it, nothing before or nothing after has ever amazed or marveled people as much as this miracle man that Nicodemus knew was Jesus. But not only were His miracles powerful, there was something else about them. We also see that His miracles were, number one, instantaneous and immediate, all with the exception of one. And a lot of people don't know that. But in Mark 8, this is the only miracle where on first glance it looks like, well, Jesus must be losing His power. Because here it says in Mark 8:22, and He cometh to Bethsaida, and they bring a blind man unto Him, and besought Him to touch him. We're told He took the blind man by the hand and led him out of the town. And when He had spit on his eyes and put hands upon him, He asked him if he saw aught. In other words, can you see? Look at the next verse. And he looked up. This is what the man said. And he looked up and said, I see men as trees walking. You ever been to the eye doctor? And he put those little things in front of you, and what's he saying? Can you see better now or now? Now or now? If you're like me, you get mighty confused. But they'll click them things, and before long, they get right on that perfect thing, and you go, I can see. Jesus is asking this man, can you see? And he's basically saying, well, it looks like I can see people, but they just look like trees. I can't make them out. So what happens? Well, look at verse 25. After that, He put His hands again upon his eyes and made him look up. And he was restored and saw every man clearly. Now, a lot of people will go to this, and they'll say, see, Jesus really didn't have the power. See, he made a mistake here. He had to redo something. But if you read this whole chapter, and I don't have verse 18 up here, but if you look at the context, he's been dealing with the Pharisees, and there's two possible answers. One is, in verse 18, he told his apostles to beware of the leaven of the Pharisees. Well, they didn't understand he was talking about the spiritual teaching. His apostles should have known that. They couldn't see it. They thought he was talking about leaven and bread. So one answer is, Jesus, by this miracle, was trying to show his own disciples to increase their faith. I read somewhere else that another answer that some hold is, Jesus was trying to increase the faith of the person he healed. But I have a tendency to lean more towards the first one. But when you look at all of Jesus' miracles, not only were they instantaneous and immediate except for that one, they were complete. His miracles were complete. He never left a cure half done. I took Carrie to the doctor yesterday, and they gave her 2 shots and all this, but the doctor will tell you, now this is a powerful medication. They do this psychologically to build you up. Makes you feel better. You've got your money's worth. At least I've been told this. If you tell a man, now this is a mighty powerful antibiotic, it can kill a horse, but I'm going to give it to you anyway, and you're probably going to feel a lot better tomorrow. Well, you are. You're going to feel better. Just as like someone would say, you look pale. Do you feel okay? Well, then you start saying, well, my head has been hurting. And it's psychological. But when you look here, Jesus, when he did something, that disease was a done deal. There was no disease that was incurable to Jesus. It didn't matter what it was. They could be dead, and he could bring them back. That's power. That's power. And the completeness of that showed his work and the significance of his work. And then something else, not only were they complete, they were permanent. I have seen people supposedly get healed on TV, be in a wheelchair, and jump up, or whatever, and then you'll find on another channel almost the same people again, weeks later. And that wasn't the case with Jesus. His cures were permanent. You can go to the doctor, and they might promise you that they can cure you, but it's just a shot in the dark. They're doing their best. It wasn't the case with Jesus. It was a closed case when he did that. So Nicodemus was right when he recognized that Jesus was a miracle man. But then, not only were the miracles of Jesus filled with divine pity and compassion and divine power, they also, we see something else, divine purpose. And I have up here, they were not destructive. When you look at the 37 recorded miracles that we have, it interests me that there is only one that is of destructive nature. And that is found in Matthew, the 21st chapter, and it's when he cursed the fig tree. 18 through 22, it says, "Now in the morning, as he returned to the city, he hungered. And when he saw a fig tree in the way, he came to it, and found nothing thereon but leaves only, and said unto it, Let no fruit grow on thee henceforward forever. And presently the fig tree withered away." If you look at verse 20, "And when the disciples saw it, they marveled, saying, How soon is the fig tree withered away? And Jesus answered and said unto them," so there's a purpose behind this destructive miracle. He says, "Verily I say unto you, if ye have faith, and doubt not, ye shall not only do this which is done to the fig tree, but also if ye shall say to this mountain, Be thou removed, and be thou cast into the sea, it shall be done." In the last verse, "And all things whatsoever ye shall ask in prayer, believing, ye shall receive." So although this is the only one that was destructive in nature, it seems he did it to construct a firmer faith in his apostles, in his disciples. And in fact, when you look at the ministry of Jesus, it was just the opposite of destructive. It was constructive. In fact, I don't have this verse on the board, but in Matthew 5:17, Jesus even stated, "Think not that I am come to destroy the law of the prophets. I came not to destroy, but to fulfill." So, not only were they not destructive, there's something else. They were not creative. In all the miracles Jesus did, he never created something that wasn't already created in the beginning in Genesis 1. You don't find that. The creative work of the Godhead was finished in the beginning. So the question arises, okay, if they weren't destructive and they weren't creative, what were they? Well, they were restorative. We'll look at a few short examples and then the lesson will be yours. First, in one instance, he restored speech to the dumb. Matthew 9:32 and 33, it says, "They went out, behold, they brought to him a dumb man possessed with a devil." Now that's the King James translation. "And when the devil was cast out, the dumb spake, and the multitudes marveled, saying, It was never so seen in Israel." So, one example, he restored speech. Another example, he restored usefulness to withered limbs. And I'll tell you, there is nothing worse than as you get older, your body ceases to function as it once did when you were younger. I can no longer play the guitar. Some people say you couldn't play it when I heard you years ago. But I tried. But I have tendonitis in my left hand and my right too. So I can only play about 15 minutes now. And I miss that. Carrie doesn't, but I do. I used to love to just pick and grin. I did a lot of grinning, but I can't do that. Jesus, though, he could restore withered limbs. He did this in Matthew 12:13. It said, "Then said he to the man, Stretch forth thy hand, and he stretched it forth, and it was restored as whole, like as the other." Wouldn't that be wonderful? To to have lived back then, you would have made your way to Jesus if you had some kind of infirmity. I guarantee you. At least I know I would. Then something else. He restored sight to the blind. We take our sight for granted oftentimes. But in Matthew 20:30 it says, "Behold, two blind men sitting by the wayside." Notice this miracle man. They knew who he was. It says when they heard that Jesus passed by, they knew what Jesus could do. And they were blind. And what did they do? It says, cried out, saying, "Have mercy on us, O Lord, thou son of David." What did Jesus do? Look in verse 34. So Jesus had compassion on them and touched their eyes. Notice again, immediately their eyes received sight, and they followed him. And then one last one. He restored hearing and speech to the deaf. Look at Mark 7. If you look in verse 32, we're told, "And they bring unto him one that was deaf and had an impediment in his speech. And they beseech him to put his hand upon him." And of course, Jesus, in verse 35, and straightway he did that, and straightway his ears were opened, and the string of his tongue was loosed, and he spake plain. So when you look at the miracles of Jesus, you see divine pity, you see divine power, and you see divine purpose. Nicodemus was absolutely right. If you wanted to give a nickname back then to this person known as Jesus, you would have said, "That's Jesus, the miracle man. He can cure anything." And that's really what Jesus did. He came into the world to restore man back to his original state since the fall of the garden. In other words, he came to restore mankind back to Almighty God. Now, just as disease and some affliction might affect us physically, that's what sin does to us spiritually. It alienates us. It separates us from God. And that's dangerous, to be separated from God. If you've ever been way up in the mountains of Montana or Wyoming, one of the first things you'll learn, they'll tell you, if you're there, is don't get separated from the group. See, there's danger in being separated. And if you're in sin, you need to realize you're separated from God. But the beauty is that Jesus came to restore that back. And one last verse, in John 20, look at verse 31. All these miracles we've been looking at, John says, but these are written. See, you weren't there and I wasn't there. But John says these are written that you might believe that Jesus is Christ. So you may believe from these miracles. But read the rest of it. That Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that believing ye might have life through his name. The question to you this morning, if you're not a Christian, is do you believe? Do you believe in this Jesus the miracle man? You say, well, yes I do. Well, it's simple. What do I do, preacher? Well, you do the same thing they've all done since the day of Pentecost. Upon hearing, that produces faith. You repent of your sins. You be confessing to be the Son of God, and you be buried in the waters of baptism. And Jesus will restore you back to the right relationship with the Father. That's not hard. You say, well, preacher, I tell you, you just don't know what I've done. And I know how you feel. Sometimes we think, there's no way God can forgive me. But if you look in Luke 15, Jesus can do anything. Just like the lost coin was restored to the woman in Luke 15. Just like the lost sheep was restored to the shepherd. Just like the lost son was restored to the father. Jesus today seeks to restore you, friend, that are lost in the darkness and the stench of sin. He can restore you. If you're willing. If you're willing. Willing to do what? Willing to obey. Willing to obey. God's done his part. you have to do yours. Maybe you've done that, but you've just gone back into the world. You've been living on your fleshly side, doing what you want to do. Brought shame on the Lord's church. Well, you need to repent. You need to make your life right while you can. And we're going to provide that opportunity at this time as we're led in this song. If we can assist you in any way whatsoever, we encourage you to come to the front.
I am so